Okay, welcome to another episode of the Regenerative Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Max Gilhane. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Giselle Bisson, also known as Recovering Vegan, on Twitter and Instagram. Giselle, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Giselle has an interesting story of having been vegetarian and eating a restricted diet for many years, and has since or then come around to reincorporating animal foods into her diet. So Giselle, give us a bit of an idea about your backstory and what made you change from eating a vegetarian or vegan diet into reintroducing animal foods.
I think it's about coming full circle to where I started before I made the decision to go vegan in the first place. And that's another story. But to answer you, I decided to go vegan in 2002 after returning from living in the south of France. And I ate loads and loads and loads of meat while I was there. It was one time in my adult life that I ate meat. And I did that because I kind of had to. I was a guest. I was with a family. I couldn't turn it down. And my health was thriving all summer. Now, prior to that, I had been vegetarian. And what turned me into a vegetarian was I lived in a neighborhood in San Francisco. I was a journalist, a magazine writer, and I happened to have an apartment in the Mission District, which is a very left-leaning neighborhood right next to the Castro, which is the gay neighborhood, and like a very revolutionary place to live, especially at that time in the 1980s. And the grocery store, my neighborhood, Rainbow Market, is very famous, all vegetarian market. There was no meat in the Rainbow Market, and that was my closest store. And I would walk there and buy my groceries. I didn't have a car. And so I just stopped eating meat because that was what was available, and it was a beautiful store. And that was sort of how I got involved in more and more vegetarian events, vegetarian potlucks, vegetarian friendships, vegetarian festivals, all vegetarian all the time, right? And it wasn't until, so I did eat meat for those 3 years that I was going back and forth between living in Europe and being in the United States, although I tried to be a vegetarian in France. And when I came back to the US, I walked into a conventional grocery store. I won't say which one, but just a big grocery store chain in the neighborhood. And I thought, I'll try buying some meat. I've been eating meat. And the smell of it, I mean, this is 2002, right? It's not now. The United States and most of the world has had this new food consciousness, and the food has gotten a lot better. But at that time, there wasn't much available, and I just looked at it. It looked really sad. It looked really old. It looked very factory farmed. I knew that those animals had had a bad upbringing. And I just said, gosh, I can't eat this. And then I started reading books like Fast Food Nation, Diet for a New Planet by Francis Moore Lapay. I read John Robbins, the co-founder of Baskin Robbins, who has written many books about plant-based diet. And there was one passage in one of these books about the inside of a slaughterhouse. And there was a lot of data about how factory farming was in the United States and what was going into the meat products. And I was almost like ready to throw up when I read this. And I just thought, okay, this is it. I have to stop eating meat. And then I was at that time starting to think about changing my career to something involving food because I'm a good cook. And I started investigating culinary academies and chef classes and going to cooking school. And it was going to cost $20,000 a year to go to the Culinary Academy in San Francisco. And I wasn't quite ready for that yet, but I saw this ad for a vegan cooking school. And the vegan cooking school was really inexpensive, I guess, because, the ingredients are cheaper. And so I decided to do this 4-day vegan cooking class. And it was raw vegan. And I had a wonderful time that weekend. It was a 4-day weekend. The food was delicious. I loved my teacher. I loved everything about it. And there was just something so sparkly about it at that time. And of course, if you only do raw vegan food for a few days, it's like a cleanse. It'll detox you and you feel really good. Plus, you're on all that fruit and all that sugar. So it was a bit high from it, from all those smoothies, and we made raw desserts with beautiful raw desserts. We did a lot of ice creams made out of frozen banana with different sauces, chocolate sauces, a lot of sugar, let me tell you. But I got back from it and I felt so good, and I was convinced after that weekend I just went vegan overnight. Just boom,
Yeah.
instant.
And give us a bit of an insight into the vegan mindset, because it's something that we're seeing more and more as doctors, people, especially young people who are either vegetarian or vegan for a variety of reasons. But give us an idea into the community and the mindset of people who are strictly vegan.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is we are better than you. You start to isolate yourself from other people and and occupy what I call the vegan echo chamber, and you get this vegan tunnel vision, which is increasingly reinforced by your social life, and you start. I'll just say I don't want to say you. I can just say what happened to me personally is I started going deeper and deeper into it to the point where I would go to the vegan festival on the weekends, vegan conferences, vegan workshops. I started following these people around like David Wolf and Dr. Gabriel Cousins, and all of these sort of vegan gurus, and paying a lot of money to go to their workshops. A lot of these people were selling supplements, and I started getting sucked into different multi-level marketing scams, where someone says, I have this algae, it's amazing, it'll make you feel better. And I felt like, looking back on it, it's like, great, you get everybody around you hooked on this diet that's really malnourishing, where they have all these nutritional deficiencies, and then you start selling them magic medicines, supplements, and foods, superfoods, that will make them feel better. And the deeper you go into veganism, the more you need this stuff,
Mm.
because you start getting sick. And as my friends and I got sicker and sicker, we were in such tunnel vision denial that this could possibly have anything to do with our diet, right? No, because our diet is the best. We're doing the healthiest, the best. It's the most conscious. It's the best for the planet. We're superior, This mindset that you're doing not just the right thing, but the best thing.
Yeah, and
And and
that's a
so
fascinating analogy to modern medicine and the food system, where you have
yes.
companies pushing foods or
Mhm.
promoting foods that have highly refined ingredients like high fructose corn syrup, like soy oil, soybean, corn, canola oil, and sugar. And then the same financial interests actually have a role in supplying diabetic and other kind of chronic disease medications. So, I mean, that's a fascinating analogy to the vegan diet, where there's an absence of fundamental nutrients that humans need to thrive, and then you have the leaders in the space providing a solution in the form of supplement superfoods.
Not just supplements, but you start. I I found that I was kind of shocked the deeper I went into it, the more that people were using recreational drugs too to cope with the illnesses, the chronic pain, depression, anxiety, uh, and that was in the beginning. So I was 40 when I started getting into veganism. I became a vegan chef, caterer. I started my own sort of underground catering business where I literally served these vegan creations to thousands of people. Now, over the years, I've seen some of these people that I served the vegan food to get cancer, and they're gone. They're dead already. right? I'm not saying I killed them with my delicious pies or anything, but, you know, here I just started seeing this connection between my social circle and constant illness. And
Mm.
again, it's really hard to not understand that it's not just, that this isn't normal. It's not everybody who's experiencing it to this extent
Yeah.
of dire sickness. Yeah.
Yeah. And the point about moral superiority is a very interesting one. And it's one that I don't think the carnivore or low carb community shares to anywhere near a stronger degree. But I feel like that is a key point in
A
terms
little
of
bit.
keeping, maybe a little bit, in
A little
keeping
bit.
people.
They're a little bit selfish too.
Yeah. But I guess from my point of view, diet should only be something to facilitate someone's optimal thriving, and there shouldn't be
Mhm,
ideology or dogma that is keeping anyone in a certain dietary box, whether that is
mhm.
in terms of refusing to add foods in or you know, remove foods. So I think that to me from the outside, the vegan ideology is very much more moralistic and I guess high horsed, perhaps you could say, in terms of its adherence and its the strictness of uh, its doctrine.
Well, what I also started seeing is that the unhealthier you get, the deeper the denial is that it could have anything to do with malnutrition or anti-nutrients or any of the things that I now know are true when you're on an exclusively plant-based diet.
Mm.
Um, but what my friends would do is say, I'm not veganing hard enough. I need to vegan more. And
Mm.
so the answer always is deeper veganism, more veganism. So you go into colonics, you get colonics, you do colon cleanses, you do gallbladder cleanses, liver cleanses, you're doing detox regimens, you're using different herbs and plants to detox the body. Then going on retreats, these retreats in exotic places like Costa Rica and in the Bahamas and so forth, and going to different institutes like the Hippocrates Institute and other places that promise to turn around cancer and chronic disease, obesity, so forth, using wheatgrass and juice cleanses.
Mm.
And some people come away from those places with remarkable turnarounds in their health, but maybe it's just because they were eating a lot of junk food. Now all of a sudden they're just eating a really clean vegan diet, but they would come back and their cancer would just
Mm.
intensify when they
Yeah,
got back.
I want
In
you to
that
speak
those
about
cases.
the emotional space that people are occupying, and you touched on it briefly when you said, you know, this idea of not veganing hard enough. It appears to me that there's a degree of guilt and maybe shame that's a part of being deeply within
Mhm.
the vegan world, and I think perhaps
Absolutely.
is correct me if I'm wrong, or it's tied to perhaps the underlying reasons why people went vegan in the first place, and that's perhaps guilt over um, killing or taking the lives of animals, guilt over a perceived environmental impact of existing as a human. Is it, does that resonate or sound similar to the reasons that you have seen?
I think it's deeper than that. I think it may stem from, and I would love to see someone do some research and studies on long term vegans and vegans. I think it stems from childhood trauma, and especially, you have a whole generation of kids now. You look at the ones that are, I mean, my generation, we were the early adopters of vegetarian and vegan diets. It started with Laurel's Kitchen Cookbook and the Greens Cookbook and some wonderful vegetarian restaurants. And it was all centered around the food and the cooking and making your own bread. And it was really pretty wholesome, the whole idea. And we were very much into nourishment and good food. And now what veganism has become is is so extreme, right? And I wonder if it's because this generation of kids, they grew up latchkey, their mother never fed them, they got home and the kitchen was empty and they just opened a can or there was frozen food or something. And so food did not have a connotation of nourishment for them. It's not a warm, fuzzy feeling for them, first of all. Secondly, they may have felt like their best friend was their dog or their cat. That nobody understands me, but I get unconditional love from an animal. And when your animal gives you unconditional love and everybody else seems to be ignoring you or it's a hostile world, you I think over fetishize the idea that animals are uh, even better than humans, right?
Mm.
And there's a huge burst of pro animal stuff in San Francisco now. I mean, every restaurant has to be dog friendly, and there's dog parks. And you go to the park on the weekend, everybody's got their dog. There are even cat cafes where you can go and have tea with your cat. I mean, it's like it's over the top, right? The this replacement, and then the whole idea of having to have a rescue animal instead of a pedigree pet. It's you're rescuing someone, an animal. So there's that, and I think also you have a whole generation of kids who grew up watching movies and TV shows where animals were anthropomorphized. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Where we saw animals have human characteristics and become characters. And as when I grew up, it was Daffy Duck and Sesame Street, and there was a little bit of this, but look at how it is now. You've got these very very realistic CGI movies where animals appear to have superpowers and they're very human,
Yeah.
or maybe even better than human.
Yeah, and I really that's a fascinating point, and I really want to explore that idea of childhood trauma more, because in my experiences working as an emergency doctor, I see various ways that people manifest self harm. Um, I think the smallest proportion of people are the ones, or perhaps the ones who are physically self harming themselves. But people have a variety of reasons of self harming themselves with alcohol, with drugs, with sugar addiction. And
Mhm.
it's a fascinating thought to think that a vegetarian or vegan strict diet, a restrictive diet, is perhaps another form of self flagellation or self harm.
Absolutely.
And that kind of
Absolutely.
makes sense to me when we see people who might steadfastly refuse to incorporate or expand their dietary restriction, even in the face of information that that their health is suffering, or that these certain amount of foods can disproportionately help them if they even include a little bit, or even
Mhm.
refusal to incorporate well sourced animal products that have had ethically a sound life. So, talk to a little bit more about that idea of childhood trauma, and I guess that as a cause of vegetarian and veganism.
Well, I know it was for me.
Hmm.
Um, it I can only see it now that when I went deeper and deeper into the diet, I got thinner and thinner, and at one point I had to go shopping. I mean, I'm already a small woman to begin with, but I had to go shopping in the girls department. I couldn't find women's clothing that fit me anymore, and so I had to go below a size 0.
Wow.
And I was proud of that at the time. I thought, "Wasn't that great? I'm so thin." And, you look great in photos when you're that thin. I was like Sarah Jessica Parker or Madonna level thin. And so we see all these movie stars and pop stars who are emaciated, and, they have to be that way for the camera. They even have it written to their contract, but that's not a good way for a woman to be. And as I got that thin, I was cold all the time, even in sunlight, Even on a hot summer day out in the bright sun, I was cold, I was shivering. I lost my menstrual period. Um, I had problems with bleeding, cuts that wouldn't heal. My skin was awful. I mean, I had cystic acne all the time. My eyes would sort of be swollen and I couldn't see out, and my health was just deteriorating. And at that time, veganism was an outlier, right? We were not a mainstream thing like it is now. It was a niche. And so people were warning me and telling me, in fact, even my boss, where I was working, they pulled me aside and said I was too thin. And they stopped sending me to meetings with clients because they didn't like the way I looked. And I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. So, I mean, looking back, yeah, I started to become anorexic. And what finally turned me around from that is a couple of different doctors and alternative healers told me I needed to gain weight and I needed to eat eggs and I needed to eat butter and I needed omega-3 fatty acids. And I was, at that point, couldn't digest those foods. I mean, I'd lost the digestive fire, the enzymes, to digest those fats and heavier foods. And I remember I started to gain weight by eating bags of potato chips. This was really the only thing with high calories that I could stomach. And as I put the weight on, I gradually attempted to eat eggs, but I was, revolted. It was very hard to put the weight back on.
Yeah, I imagine. And what you sound like is that for you the restrictive dietary practice was very much or manifested as an eating disorder, and the vegetarianism
Absolutely.
was
Yeah.
itself a facet or um, an incarnation of disordered eating. I want to make the point for the listeners that, I guess, to preface what we're talking about is that it's my belief, and I believe the best scientific evidence points that restricting animal foods is suboptimal for human health, for
Mhm.
the reason that you're lacking a range of key nutrients, micronutrients, and macronutrients in the form of protein that your body needs to not only thrive, but even to survive. And the fact that, as Giselle had mentioned, that was a progressive downward health trajectory for long term vegans implies that in the absence of those animal foods, the human body will waste away. And for
Mhm.
those who or unsure or of the actual evidence for humans as needing animal meat, I know that it's a very very hotly debated topic, and you could almost see mirror images of the same argument from either side of the dietary aisle.
Absolutely.
But I believe the irrefutable evidence in my mind is radioisotope carbon dating, and that's a form of paleoanthropology that looks at the concentration or the presence of specific nitrogen isotopes in particular bones. And when we look or when we map the isotypes of nitrogen in different animals, we can put together a trophic ladder of the trophic list, basically, where at the bottom you have herbivores who are eating exclusively grass and nuts and trees and plants, and then further up that trophic level are the degree to which an animal is a carnivore, and closer to the top of the list is wolves and foxes, and they express more of this isotope because they're bioaccumulated that from consuming animals that were lower down. And in the I believe it was the Paleolithic period, and look up the work of Mickey Bendorf for the exact details, that you had humans at the top of that trophic level. And that is the most solid circumstantial evidence in my mind of humans as carnivores, because we were consuming other carnivores, meant that we were eating wolves, we were eating bears, we were eating foxes. And so, in terms of the historical context that humans' nutritional needs, to me, that implies that we are have a very, very, very deep seated requirement for animal type foods. So you've given us a little bit of a preview of the health issues that you experienced on veganism, and I want to I guess, dig a little bit deeper into that topic, and I want you to explore the, I guess, the issues that you saw not only yourself but in the people around you.
As it got worse and worse, I was coughing almost half the year. I mean, literally, I had bronchitis. I started getting asthma where I would just sort of seize up. I had chronic bronchitis, chronic sinusitis. I had menstrual irregularities. Um, and as I got older, those irregularities turned into gushing, with like blood clots coming out, horrible cramping, unable, extreme anemia. And then there were just all the emergency room visits that were always happening. Now, I don't like to go to the doctor. I never was into doctors. I was into like the whole holistic, we're going to do it ourselves with herbs and supplements and juices kind of thinking. But then all of a sudden you find that as holistic as you are, you're running off to the emergency room. And one of the reasons I had to do that was that my elbows started swelling up and I would get like this fluid in my elbows. I don't know what was causing this. Doctors didn't know what it was, but they had to use a needle and suck it out, suck the fluid out of my joints. Um, Another weird thing that happened is I got like a huge, huge infection on my face, which also was like a boil that had to be drained by a plastic surgeon. Um, I was so spaced out and shaky all the time, especially in the morning. The one morning I was making a cup of tea and I was making green tea in the morning and it dropped and it spilled all over me, hot tea. And I ended up in the emergency room. I went into shock. I had burns over a large part of my body and I had to go to the ER. I had third-degree burns. Let's see.
Well, from a medical
um,
point of view, like I can get some insight and we can shed some insight. So, I mean, it sounds like you had some type of joint effusion in your elbow or some type of reactive arthritis. We know substances like oxalates that are found richly in a various range of plant compounds, like turmeric, particularly, can bioaccumulate in joints. So it's plausible that exclusive plant-based diet contributed to that. I mean, being anemic
mhm,
and lacking protein, lacking um, all your micronutrients is going to impair your immune system function. So you're going to be more susceptible
mhm,
to bacterial and viral pathogens. In terms of your bronchitis, in terms of what sounds like a facial cellulitis. So it's not unfounded, or we can rationalize or understand why these health problems were cropping up when we in the context of a restricted diet.
plus cold sore outbreaks, herpes cold sores, really bad, and where it was happening every month. I would get these outbreaks. They would take days and days to go away, and I had to go and get medication for that, a cyclovir. Um, I was getting migraine headaches. The migraine headaches were the worst. 3 days a month, 3 entire solid days of migraine. Again, you're so holistic and everything, and you're running off to the doctor to get medication for your migraines,
Mm,
or your friends are passing these medications around, like sumatrapan,
yes.
for triptans,
Yeah.
and uh,
Well, and
wow,
I want to make a point on
you
that
know,
because you make a very, very, very interesting point, which is a contradiction and a degree of hypocrisy,
totally,
which is
yep.
there's an ideology based on natural health, which is, I guess, at the core or one of the core tenets of vegetarian and veganism. Yet, yet your people whose adherents, they're being forced to engage with all these non-natural sources of medicine or supplementation
Mhm.
in order to just be surviving. And we mentioned that the superfoods, the algae superfoods, and then we're mentioning things like recreational drugs that you talked about. Now we're talking about prescription pharmaceuticals. So it's really painting this hypocritical picture of health, which is, if this dietary approach is so healthy, then why are all these extraneous factors necessary? It doesn't make sense. So it's obviously there's something wrong here, in terms of the completeness of a vegetarian or vegan diet. And I mean, tell me, Giselle, do you think people are aware of that contradiction, or I mean, are they aware of the?
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
No, 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 they're not aware of it at all. They're sick all the time. They have cancer. They're going into I know a dozen people right now, women who have stage 4 breast cancer. Every single one of them is on a primarily plant-based diet. They all think I'm nuts when I tell them, well, maybe you should cut down on sugar and eat some meat, and or maybe try a ketogenic diet. That will greatly reduce the carbohydrate and sugar in your body and stop feeding the cancer. Oh no, I'm going to go on a juice cleanse. I'm on this new diet for
yeah,
cancer that is 100% plant-based. They're
yeah.
actually going on special plant-based diets to, quote, cure and reverse their breast cancer.
Mm. And for the listeners, if you check out my earlier episode with Dr. Anthony Chafee, he talks specifically about certain plant-based compounds that are directly carcinogenic, that cause cancer. And he sources Professor Bruce Ames, in terms of the finding that the carcinogenic compounds in that are naturally produced were outnumbering human or man-made ones quite significantly. So, I mean, there is possibility that in someone who has impaired immune function through malnutrition, who is consistently ingesting plant-based carcinogenic compounds, that you could be contributing to the development of something like breast cancer, as well as that, which is again tying into our previous point about the absence of a healthy approach to eating, is that often in the absence of animal fat, which is what humans evolved eating, we people reach for low quality fats, which is the polyunsaturated omega-6 seed oils. And again, I just did a podcast with Tucker Goodrich and explaining how linoleic acid in seed oils contains, which is the major product or the main fatty acid in seed oils, breaks down into a range of highly carcinogenic and basically metabolically toxic compounds, of which 4-hydroxynonenal or 4-HNE is a chief one. So you have a situation where a vegan or say a strict vegan, is not only deficient of key nutrients, but there's additional stress and toxicity from these plant-based compounds, and perhaps overlying metabolic dysfunction in the form of prediabetes, insulin resistance, or a frank diagnosis of diabetes, because they're not eating these essential animal fats.
Absolutely. It's not just the lack of animal fats; it's the excess of oxalate.
Mm,
And I didn't understand the damage that oxalates cause until I started removing them from my diet. So, um, about 3 years ago was when I started eating meat again, and that's when I created the Recovering Vegan on Twitter, this personality that I have, and I started tweeting under a, a anonymous persona, so I could follow doctors and researchers and nutritionists who believe in eating meat,
mm,
without any shame or repercussions from my community or anybody in my family knowing that I was doing this. That's
mm.
how afraid I was to even show an interest in meat.
Yeah.
And And yeah, and as I went down that rabbit hole, I started learning about oxalate and the carnivore diet. And I tried eating all carnivore for a day here and there, and the oxalate dumping, the detoxification of these oxalates was so severe that I went back to a ketogenic or low carb diet because my body just couldn't take it. It was overwhelming. I've been on a carnivore diet now again for about 11 days since January 1. And the oxalate dumping has been horrible, really
Mm.
severe. And at times I wonder if I should just stop.
The before we move on, I just wanted to get your thoughts on another, I guess, observation that I've made in terms of people who are eating vegan or strict vegetarian diets, and that is grey hair. And to me, just from my own personal observation, is that, which is not scientifically rigorous, but it's I've noticed enough to make a mental note about it, is that it seems that people who are young women, particularly who are strict vegetarian and vegan, seem to be going grey at ages that would be usually associated with 50, 45, 50, 60 year old people. Is that a finding that you have seen yourself?
Well, it's hard to know because everybody colors their hair.
Mm,
But one thing I would say that I've noticed is it no hair at all. How about that one? Just hair
mm,
falling out, hair breaking off. A lot of vegan women and vegan influencers don't even have their real hair. They're wearing wigs. They're wearing hair extensions. A lot of times, these cornrow braids are really popular. Um, there's a lot of fakery that goes on
mm.
to look good when what you're really doing is you're covering up your malnutrition.
Yes, yes, and
My
I
hair
mean we
was
know.
horrible. My hair was really bad as a vegan. It was
Yeah.
awful. It was breaking off. It was really dry and frizzy. And then, you can see that since I've been eating meat again, it doesn't grow in gray at all.
Mm,
And I'm 60. The
yeah.
hair has been growing in darker. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, from a medical and scientific point of view, we know that uh, premature graying is associated with a range of factors, and from a nutritional point of view, B12 deficiency. So, I mean, there's cases of
Mm.
vitamin B12 deficiency and premature graying that resolve once adequate vitamin B12 is provided. Another contributing
Mhm.
factor can be thyroid dysfunction, and we know
Mm.
that vegetables like brassica vegetables, kale, Brussels sprouts, collard greens contain goitrogenic compounds. And these are
Mhm.
plant based compounds that inhibit your body's ability to use iodine, a key nutrient at your thyroid gland. So you could be directly inhibiting its ability to use iodine and therefore disrupting thyroid function, as well as oxidative stress. So if you have oxidative stress of that hair follicle, it's going to lose its pigment, and it's going to lose its pigment early. So already, I mean, that's three mechanisms that we can understand that a vegetarian or strict vegetarian or vegan diet could be contributing to premature hair graying, B12 deficiency, thyroid disruption, oxidative stress. So to me, whether or not maybe I'll have to do an observational study to bear this scientific hypothesis out, but it makes sense that that is the case when we see people reintroduce animal foods and then get their hair pigment back. I mean, it's very common, but it's not an uncommon anecdote to hear hair pigment
Mm.
returning on people who are doing a high animal based diet. So it seems
These
to
are
me
my
that
roots.
that's a very
They're not gray.
unfortunate consequence of dietary restriction.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah,
And mm,
I wish I knew all of this years ago.
yeah, yeah. Look, and it's a shame because I mean, you've just talked about the effects in terms of regular life of having a restricted diet, but I want to give the listeners a bit of an idea about the effect on a growing baby, because in my mind, everyone is entitled to make their own health decisions when it comes to their own individual body. That's well within their rights. But if there's another person involved, whether that's particularly whether that's a growing fetus or a toddler or a child, then there's a completely different set of obligations to in terms of welfare to be looking after. And we know that deprivation of a certain range of nutrients is going to lead to suboptimal pregnancy and birth and growth outcomes. And I really point people, I'll put a link in the show notes to Lily Nichols, who's a dietitian who's written a very good book called Real Food for Pregnancy. And if you're deficient in nutrients like choline, like the omega-3, the omega-3s, DHA and EPA, in bioavailable iron, you're going to have problems, and baby's cognition and other types of functions are going to be impaired. So, I mean, what have you seen, Giselle, in terms of people who, attempting or doing a restricted diet with children with pregnancy and with young children?
Well, I can only really talk about myself. I lost a child at around 5.5 months,
I'm sorry to hear
and
that.
um, ended up, having to have a surgical intervention, and I nearly bled to death. And after that happened, I just miscarried. But now looking, and I'm childless, by the way. So that's another sadness that I feel personally, where I really feel ripped off by veganism. But I also noticed, most of my friends didn't have kids either. So we have uh, we're learning, as the effects that a plant-based diet has on fertility and libido and testosterone levels in men.
Mm.
Eating
Yeah,
too much
yeah,
soy. Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah, I have a lot of sadness around that. Obviously, if I was losing my menstrual period, my breasts disappeared. I was, like completely flat. I mean, normally I'm like a D cup. I went to an A during my most severe vegan years. I was just absolutely flat as a board. I would wear, padded bras and stuff to try to cover it up. Um, I had no hips, no
Yeah,
body fat.
thank you for sharing that. That's a very personal insight into your private life, and I really appreciate you sharing that with the listeners. And I mean, from a medical point of view, let's try and explain what was happening. And again, absence of period, amenorrhea. This happens when the female body, doesn't have sufficient nutrients and fat stores to hold a pregnancy, so it turns off the menstrual cycle and the ovulatory cycle, because it doesn't want you to fall pregnant if it's not able to sustain a baby. So, I mean, that is a well-known and well-documented fact. Um,
Big red
losing
flag.
breast. Sorry,
It's a big red flag when
it's
you
a big
lose your
red flag,
period. You should pay
and
yeah.
losing breast mass. You know, cholesterol, dietary cholesterol is a precursor for human steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So if you're eating a diet that is rich in phytosterol, which is the plant sterol, instead of cholesterol, the animal sterol that we evolved eating, you're not going to be producing optimal amounts of estrogen, progesterone in the right proportions. And you need those hormones to support healthy breast tissue. So it's unsurprising to me that you would see atrophy of breast tissue on a vegetarian or vegan diet that is deficient in these hormones. Protein, and again, branched chain amino acids that are from animal meat and animal products, are essential in maintaining the structure of our body. The actual the amino acids are needed to maintain muscle mass, maintain soft tissue mass. So if you're eating a diet that's deficient in those bioavailable amino acids to build the structure of your body, then it's not surprising to me that you might get something like reduction in breast size, or perhaps sagging, even, just reasoning from first principles. So I think that's very nice of you and beautiful of you to share that personal insight into your life, because other people who are embarking on this effort, on this mission of eating a restricted diet, it would benefit them to know that.
Well, there are other vegans who end up morbidly obese, though,
Mm.
and they don't lose breast tissue, right? So it really depends on what plant-based foods you're eating. And are you eating a lot of carbohydrates? Are you eating a lot of bread? Are you eating a lot of pasta and soy products and conventional junk food? I mean, none of that was available when I was going into vegetarianism and veganism, we cooked everything from scratch. There
Yeah.
weren't these products in the stores. Now you can go in the store and you can find vegan donuts and vegan pastries. France just announced the first vegan croissant.
Yeah. Yeah. And
What a travesty, right?
it reflects, yeah, well, it reflects the degree to which the ideology of the movement is being hijacked to a certain degree by companies, by the food industry, by companies who are making money from selling plant foods, which are vegan and vegetarian friendly, but are essentially concoctions of refined carbs, refined sugars, and or not unrefined sugar and seed oils. So again, we're
Mhm.
really playing on this idea that on the surface it appears to be a healthier dietary choice, but the implementation, as we're seeing most people do it, is leading people to metabolic syndrome, to prediabetes, to obesity, as well as profound nutrient deficiency. So, I mean, with that being said, and we've painted a little bit of a bleak picture, and I don't mean to scare people intentionally, but more to be honest and be transparent and be clear in communicating the downsides of what on the surface appears to be, an optimal health choice. So, tell us now, Giselle,
Right.
about how you felt since reincorporating animal products.
Almost everybody who goes from being a vegan or vegetarian to eating meat again will describe that first moment that they ate red meat, and their eyes light up. You can go on YouTube and find videos of vegans eating meat for the first time. I mean, I felt like my brain rebooted. It was amazing. I mean, and I'd cheated a little bit here and there, and sometimes had a little bit of this or that, but I stayed away from beef. No way was I ever going to eat that. And the first time I had a steak, that was just incredible. And I was really afraid I would throw up, or I would get sick, or I would get diarrhea, or I had all these fears around eating it, and I was just surprised it was easy to digest, and it felt good. But I didn't, just become a carnivore overnight. It was a very long, gradual reintroduction.
Mm. And what we talked about earlier about childhood trauma as the cause or the stimulus to become vegetarian or vegan in the first place. Was there a resolution or a piece coming to terms with some kind of early trauma that allowed you to be happy with yourself in terms of reintroducing steak or animal food?
That's really fascinating. I want to think about that. Um, no, the reason I did it was because I had a car accident. I was in a car accident as a passenger, and overnight I was starting to lose my ability to walk, and I went to doctor after doctor after doctor. My first doctor was a really good chiropractor who was into paleo to the extent that he had little snacks of nuts, in his office, and he was selling paleo supplements and stuff. And he looked great. His wife looked great. And as he was working on me and I was in so much pain, he started teaching me about the relationship between inflammation and your diet. And he first thing he told me to do was to take an omega-3 fatty acid supplement, fish oil. And he gave me a particular one that had a balance of 3, 6, and 9. And that started helping a little bit. But he really urged me to think about taking, changing my diet and going on a paleo diet. So that was the first eye opening experience. The second was when I got my first MRI. Once I saw the inside of my body, I mean, what an amazing journey that is, to learn what's inside your body and to have a photograph in 3 dimensions where you can, like, go through it and see everything that's going on. And the first very scary thing that was going on that had nothing to do with my accident was I had hundreds of tumors throughout my abdomen. Um, they were explained. It was explained to me that these were benign fibroid tumors, but one of the tumors was was large, and it was blocking my bladder. that's just in the way and causing my bladder to be like half the normal size, just very plainly visible on the MRI. And I also had Nebotian cysts, and I had hundreds of those all over my cervix. And like not just on the inside of the cervix, but like on the other side. I mean, my pelvis was a mess. And then looking at the visceral fat, here I am, a skinny person, but I had this visceral fat everywhere. I also saw that my spine was completely deteriorated. Now, it wasn't like my spine is so bad now, that I've been told I've been to neurologist after neurologist after neurologist. The last time I had an emergency room visit for an autoimmune arthritis flare, uh, the neurologist or the doctor told me that if I ever have a slip and fall again, I could be paralyzed from the neck down. And the reason for this is that the accident, the trauma, um, caused discs to bulge into my spinal cord, and my spinal cord was already extremely compromised. And it's a condition called stenosis, which you might know about. It was explained to me that this might be congenital. I don't know. There is also a condition called sclerosis, where you have these lesions on the spinal cord. There was also a condition called myelopathy. Now that was when and degenerative disc disease, and something called ankylosing spondylitis, spondyloarthropathy. Um, I could go on and on and on. If there's a disease you can have in your spine, I have it. And it was so, once I Googled myelopathy, and bing, this article comes up. The first article that comes up when you Google myelopathy is vegetarian myelopathy. And then you see the research on vegan myelopathy. And it's literally a disease that's showing up in long-term vegetarians and vegans. Maybe you could comment on that.
Like you had a fibroid uterus, and you had some degeneration of your spine. I mean, typically in people who don't eat animal based diet, or sorry, any animal foods, it's common to get osteoporosis, and especially if that's in the context of vitamin D deficiency and not enough dietary calcium. I'm not sure if in that case you had osteopenia or osteoporosis. Myelopathy is an interesting one. Obviously, it's a description of the disease process. What's relevant for vegans or people who are severely vitamin B12 deficient, you can get a subacute. You can get a degeneration of your spinal cord because you're simply lacking in such a critical vitamin for neuronal function. So, and something like ankylosing spondylitis, again, is a multifactorial autoimmune condition, but there is evidence to suggest that plant antigens can be provoking the immune system in the context of a disrupted gut barrier function to lower people's susceptibility to developing autoimmune conditions. But having said that, there's lots of other factors involved. So, I mean, I guess the total picture is that, and I really want to paint that in totality, is that there are health consequences to eating a restricted diet. I also want to make the point that I'm not necessarily advocating that everyone should go carnivore. I'm advocating that people should introduce a basic amount of animal food such that they can meet their basic micronutrient and protein requirements. So thank you, Giselle, so much for sharing that insight into your own health journey. I want to, I'm mindful of your time, and I want to tie this interview up. Do you have any, I guess, final messages for people who are on a vegetarian or vegan diet, or might be considering whether adding some animal food might be in their best interests?
There is a support group. There are two support groups that you might try joining. One is the Restoration Health Vegan Recovery Support Group on Facebook. It's invitation only. You have to be approved by the moderator. They're trying to keep vegans out of it. because there've been so many death threats and, harassment. But that's a good place to start, just paying attention to other vegans, connecting with other vegans who are recovering. There's another large group on Reddit called r/x-vegan. There's a public ex-vegan group. A lot of these are private, in order to protect people. You can also start following some of the doctors who are ex-vegans who are now promoting a meat-based diet. Dr. Paul Saladino was a vegan, Dr. Siddhar. There are many influencers now in the keto and carnivore community who went down that path because they themselves were sick and they woke up. If you're having trouble sort of deprogramming yourself from veganism and feel guilty about eating animals again, I empathize. I had a really hard time doing it. It was really, really, really hard getting over the psychological barrier. It was very hard to get away from the echo chamber, the social pressure, the ostracism. I got ostracized by my friends and family. I suffered a lot of ridicule. Um, you have to just say, I'm worth it. My life is worth it.
Yes.
I want to live. I want to be healthy. You have to improve your self-esteem and recognize that hurting yourself is not a good thing, and that you're hurting yourself for the animals. Like, this isn't even logical. So, who why are you doing this to yourself? We live in a world of infinite choices, and we have opportunities that our ancestors didn't have. I mean, they had to work really hard to get meat. They had to work really hard to eat, and they fought tooth and nail in order to put protein on the table for their families. And here you can just go to, stroll into Whole Foods, and it's so easy for you. Why wouldn't you do that? And it's not even more expensive. That's the amazing thing. Once I started eating again, I just couldn't believe how cheap it was. So I again, I think uh, the deprogramming is a big part of it. There are also some YouTube channels. There's one called Vegan Degeneration, and there's a guy from Germany. His name is Gotis, Germany or Eastern Europe, Goatis. You can watch their videos, and they just rip into a lot of these vegan influencers and how unhealthy they look, and they talk about different vegans who are unhealthy. And I must have watched those videos 100 times before I finally woke up.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I think that's very, very good advice. And I want to end the podcast on the point of the psychology. I'm not dogmatic about exactly what you eat, as long as it includes some amount of animal foods that we know from a scientific
Mm-hmm.
and evolutionary point of view that they're essential for human health. And I really love the way, Giselle, you said, you're good enough. Like, there's no reason to self-harm or restrict yourself from a self-esteem point of view, or manifest that as a dietary restriction. And your health comes first, and to put that, or to accept that and realize that your health is important, I think will help in terms of coming to terms and accepting that you have that there's certain foods that are better than others for human thriving. So, Giselle, thank you again for your time. Please give us an idea of where people can follow you, and follow your work.
Oh, the best place to follow me is on Twitter at Recovering Vegan, or Vegan Recovering is my handle. I'm also on Instagram at The Recovering Vegan, and Facebook. I have a Facebook at Recovering Vegan also, and I'll be starting some more channels, TikTok and so forth.
Great.
I'm already reaching almost 3 million people a month in the last month
Fantastic.
alone on Twitter. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks again for sharing your personal insight.
Thank you I learned so much from you. I wish I knew all of this a long time ago.
Great. All right. Thank you. See ya.